Hi everyone! So for the first time ever, we're going to have Steam sale recommendations on this channel. These are games that I have only personally played, so I'm not going to recommend any games that I haven't played yet. Secondly, we're not going to recommend obvious games, like The Witcher 3, because we all know, that's a great game and everyone knows that. So most notable games that are, big titles won't get attention most likely unless they're on like some sort of insanely good discount. Also, what I would also suggest is that you do not buy off of Steam directly right away. I know that may sound weird, but what you want to do is you want to use istthereanydeal.com, which, just disclaimer, I'm not sponsored by or anything like that. To check the prices of the games, because what it'll do is it'll check, all the stores that you could possibly buy it on and give you the best prices. A lot of these stores will even give you a Steam key to then activate on Steam, and they're all legitimate sites. They're not the gray market area, which I would never recommend going to those, by the way. You may also notice that Steam is currently having a $5 discount if you're spending $30 or more. Just note that this is a one-time discount. It doesn't carry over to each purchase, so I would highly recommend you don't rely on that for each and every purchase, because that's just not the case. It doesn't, it doesn't make that obvious when you first look at it. It doesn't stack if you put, more than $30. If you put like 60, it doesn't take 10 off or anything like that either. So just be aware of that. So you may have also noticed that Steam is currently having a $5 discount for $30 spent. Just note that this is a one-time thing. It doesn't stack, so if you spend 60, you don't get $10 off, for example. This also may not even get you the best price for a game that is currently on sale elsewhere. Like Resident Evil 3 I just purchased, and I can't recommend it yet because I haven't played much of it. But basically, the $5 discount may not actually add up to what other sites are selling it at. So I was able to get Resident Evil 3 for cheaper despite that $5 discount elsewhere. So again, use Is There Any Deal for any games that you purchase here. So let's begin. So the first game I'm going to recommend, which, let me make it clear, none of these games are in any particular order, is Pathfinder Kingmaker. It's a CRPG that has a fantastic campaign and writing. There's lots of dialogue that you could choose from, and your choices do really have impact on it. The game also lets you be more of whatever you want to be. So there's the whole, D&D type alignment system of everything from lawful good to chaotic evil, and you could really just be anything in that scale. Like I said before, your actions do have consequences, so like even if you mean to do the right thing, things don't always go the way you would expect them to, which I really appreciate in a game, because that's sort of how life works, really. You could have the best intentions and try to do something you think is right, and it actually make a situation perhaps even worse, or not give you the desired effect that you want. There's plenty of companions in it to recruit, which you could also miss, by the way, so watch out for that. They all have their own like and dislike system to you, so your actions do impact what they think of you, and each companion has their own quest line as well, so you get to better know them and understand them better. And they all range from, everything from lawful good to chaotic evil themselves. So it's really interesting. One of the best parts of it, and as you could probably tell from the title of the game, the Kingmaker part, is you start off with your own little town, basically, and you could build it up into a large city. and take over more and more land as the game goes on and actually manage all the cities, which is a nice touch to the game. It makes you really feel like you're in control. On top of it, there's events that happen, so like you know how like kings and queens were always like bugged by people, oh, we have this problem, can you help us fix it kind of thing, they go to the throne room, that kind of thing. You see it in like all the stories in medieval times. Well, that happens to you. So you have to make decisions, and some of them aren't even things that you have to go and do. So it's not always like we need help fighting the monsters over here kind of thing, but rather there's this problem. How do you suggest we fix it kind of thing? And those choices also have consequences on top of it. I can't recommend this game enough. I really loved it. I just realized while recording this I forgot to say the price of Pathfinder Kingmaker currently. So, my mistake. The price for it is $12, and I'll be sure to mention the price much earlier on from now on. Natural Selection 2. Oh, it excites me just to even recommend this game. It's only $2 right now, which is an absolute steal. I would recommend this game even if it was full price, but for $2, like, just get it kind of thing. So Natural Selection 2 is a first-person shooter that has a bit of a twist. So there's two different teams. One of them's the Space Marines, and they act much like you would expect Space Marines, with guns, with heavier armor, with jetpacks and whatnot. The twist there is they also have a team commander, which plays in more of an RTS style. And if you play as the commander, you choose where to build, give the orders to your troops, which are all, again, played by other people. And your every action you have there has huge consequences if you play the commander. A lot of the time, victory or defeat comes down on, the commander's decisions. While on the reverse side, the other team, you play as aliens, which also build structures, and they can evolve to be different types of aliens. So like an Onos is a giant, almost like elephant-sized alien that could like literally just eat Marines and just mow them down with their brute strength kind of thing. You start off as almost like a dog-like alien that bite as well. There's also other cool evolutions of them that you could choose from, each playing very, very differently than the other ones that you could evolve into. So of course the goal at the end of the day is to destroy, each other and each other's bases, which will cause the other team to, of course, lose. It's very unique because the two teams play so drastically different, but it's such a fun game. It's got a good community behind it. Most players will, if you ever want to start commanding, just tell the people that you're new and they'll be understanding and they'll even try to help you kind of thing. It's got a really good community, I think. It could always use more players as well, and it really deserves it. So this is probably one of my highest recommendations, especially for the price. Project Zomboid, $9. Ah, I love this game so much. Just to give you an idea of how much I played it, I've put 164 hours into this game, according to Steam, but the reality is it's much longer than that because I owned it before it was on Steam and was eventually given a Steam key by the developer. Just a warning though, the game is still in early access, and despite it coming out, like 7 years ago now, I think, it's still worked on all the time. The reason why it's not fully released, it was very unfortunate circumstances involving the developers with a break-in and everything, but I don't want to get into all that. It's a long story. So this game is fantastic. It's a realistic, well, in air quotes, realistic, zombie survival game where you actually have to use your skills as a character and enhance those skills when you can to survive. It's both single player and multiplayer, so you could play online with servers if you want with other people, or you could play it alone or even on split screen with other players. You craft, you build, you have to forage for food. You know, it's all, you're in a really desperate situation, and weapons break, for example. The game's actually really tough. It's not a game where you really survive. There is no winning, and it's a game where you're eventually going to die. It's only a matter of time before some circumstance happens where your character ends up dead. And it's the type of game where, you know, once you're dead, you're dead kind of thing. You know, it's permadeath. So you're when you actually lose a character that you've been playing for a very long time, it's actually impactful because it actually means something because you invested so much into them. I realize that may not be for everyone, but for me, it adds more value to the character's death in the game. I would highly recommend it. It like it's amazing when you're like swarmed by literally hundreds of zombies on the screen and somehow you like just slip through, or how you just turn the corner and there's a zombie and suddenly they scratch you and you have a chance of infection just from a scratch, for example. So you don't know if you're going to survive or not. Eventually, within a few days, you might get sick and then eventually, you know, die and turn yourself, which I think is very unique to actually be able to see happen to your character. Again, I can't recommend this game enough. It's a wonderful game. The developers are absolutely awesome. I've had the honor of talking with them a little bit in the past. That was years ago. BattleTech. This game is currently 75% off for $9.99. That's a great discount for this really good game. So in this game, you're a mercenary leader, and you manage your mercenaries, which are all mech warrior. And the game is mostly turn-based combat, which is done through an overhead view where you command, you know, which mech you want to, you know, move where and attack what kind of game. It does it very, very well. The game could even be quite challenging on certain missions for sure. It's more than just pure combat, though. You have to manage things like contracts. You have to manage fixing up your ship and upgrading it, uh, fixing up your mechs, upgrading your mechs, getting new mechs, getting new pilots, which are called mech warriors. There's much more to it than just, you know, just the combat itself, and it all meshes really well together. There's a decent campaign in it as well. Um, it's not the best story ever. It's pretty obvious where things go, kind of thing, but it's suitable for what it is. And another great aspect of it is, like, even after you finish the campaign, you could still play on the campaign map and still go around and, you know, accept new jobs and do new things and upgrade your mechs even more or get new mechs. So the game never truly ends even after the campaign is completed. Blood Bowl 2. So I'm going to give two prices for this. And just to be clear, the first one is the Legendary Edition, which is 70% off for $9. It comes with all the DLC and the expansion pack as well. And then your other alternative is Blood Bowl 2, the normal edition, just the vanilla game, which is 80% off at $4. I love this game. I would also recommend the first game, but there's really no point in getting it when the second game is so similar. So in Blood Bowl 2, you're actually taking place in a fantasy world that takes place in the same world as Warhammer, if you're familiar with that fantasy universe. And this may sound silly, but it's football in it. Like, there's a whole long you know, lower story about, you know, them finding out about an ancient game that people used to play and whatnot. But the story doesn't matter. What really matters is how the game is played. So this game is also a turn-based game, and as you could imagine, it has typical football rules, but except it's much more violent. Like players could actually die on the field, kind of thing. It's that violent and nasty. You know, there's very few rules, and even though there are some rules, like no weapons, for example, some players will just walk onto the field blatantly showing it, and they can't actually be ejected from the game until they actually use it, which often leads to injury or deaths for the unfortunate victim of said weapons. So there's a ton of fantasy races for everything from, you know, elves, orcs, Amazons, the undead, uh, lizardmen, chaos, you know, everything that you would typically see in such a fantasy universe, and of course pretty much every major race that is in the Warhammer universe. It's a fun game, but it can be frustrating at times. Like, you have to accept that RNG is a big aspect to this, because everything that you do is pretty much decided by a dice roll. Any action that you take, except if when you move and you're allowed amount space with no consequence. Your team gains levels as you play, uh, which is great because there's, you know, a lot of RPG elements to this game as well. Your players get better over time. Your players, like I mentioned previously, can be injured or even killed, and even an injury could really damage a player's stats to the point where you might want to just replace them anyways. I've had crazy games where, you know, like the beginning dice roll of the kickoff makes some like terrible event that has caused several casualties on my team before I could even make a single decision. I know that sounds awful, but the randomness of it is also quite fun. And don't get me wrong, the game isn't just complete randomness. You do need strategy. You do need to play to your team's types of strengths. For example, the elves tend to be good at passing, for example, and running around. While of course, like the orcs tend to be, you know, more engaging head on and just smashing everything that they can. There's also online multiplayer. You could even create your own custom leagues and schedule your own games with other people if you so wish. You don't have to do that. You could also play single player and play in leagues with the other AI teams. And just in case you're wondering, yeah, if you're playing in a league with AI teams, if you kill one of their players and happen to be in like a tournament where you happen to run into them again, that character is still dead. So you could actually affect the effectiveness of the teams that you typically play against in that league, which is a nice touch because there's actual consequences for everything that actually happens on the field. You also have some management aspects to the game, like you have a certain amount of wealth that you get from winning or losing a game, which is also even randomized through a dice roll to some degree. But yeah, you gotta manage it because say if one of your players dies, then you gotta purchase a new one, and that costs money. And if your team doesn't have that money, then you could find this yourself in a situation where you may be down a player, which is just like devastating to your team. Space Pirates and Zombies. This game is 60% off, only at $4. Now, this game is great. It's a bit old now and the graphics are certainly dated, but it's a very humorous game where, well, of course, like as it sounds, you're in space with that's full of pirates and zombies. There's a story campaign for it that explains all the events, and one thing to note is that Total Biscuit was actually a voice actor in this game, and that's something that makes it even more special to me because I would love this game even if he wasn't, but the fact that, you know, I watched him for years before he passed, it just adds a little more love to the game for sure. Basically, in this, you constantly get into, you know, combat with pirates, space zombies who also just like infect ships and try to infect you as well. You could also end up in, you know, fighting other factions who aren't, you know, they're not pirates or zombies, but they're just other factions if you get into bad graces kind of thing. It's a top-down view, and you get to upgrade your ships, manage your loadouts, things like that. It's a really fun game. You eventually start leading fleets, and of course learn about the zombie threat and have to deal with it. My only real downside to this game is that once you complete it, it just ends. Even though like the map is so huge, like there's so many places to visit, and each game is different as well. So you'll never basically get a universe that's the same, or solar system rather, that's the same from the last time you played, which will affect the way you progress in your ships and equipment you get. But the story will always stay the same, just so you know. But yeah, not being able to continue after you finish is a big bummer. You don't have to go and finish the game right away if you don't want to, but just be aware of that. So do give this a look over for $4. It's a really good game. I can't recommend it enough. If I'm also going to talk about SPAZ 2 right after this, in fact, and just be aware that there's also a bundle collection, which is 64% off instead of 60% off, so you could save a little bit there. And if you actually happen to own one but not the other, you could still buy the collection and get that higher discount off, and it won't charge you for the game you already own. You don't get an extra copy or anything like that, but it's worth noting you'll save extra on it. So just a heads up. Space Pirates and Zombies 2, or SPAZ 2. 60% off at only $7.99. This game is a flawed gem in my opinion. It has some issues the previous game didn't have, but also fixes some issues the previous game had. For example, once you complete the campaign in this one, you could continue playing. You could also just create your own sandbox games where there is no storyline going on. You could even decide like how big it is, how hard it's going to be on you, even if the zombies pop up or not. So, which I'll get into later, why that might be important. So in this one, the biggest change is, of course, the combat being in 3D now. So you get an actual 3D ship. Everything looks beautiful when you're actually in combat. It plays quite well in combat as well, but there are a few downsides. Like the ships that you eventually command, they just don't have like the big fleet feeling that you did in the first game. And on top of it, this means most of your little helper ships are pretty useless, especially later in the game against stronger opponents. They're more cannon fodder than anything in the end. You sometimes do end up getting into like fights with where another faction's character will help you, or you could even create your own faction, and sometimes you'll end up in a fight with a helper captain. But the issue there is they typically get overwhelmed quite fast because, again, most fights you'll tend to be outnumbered in any real fight anyways. So there's some balance issues there. And on top of it, the zombies are much more powerful now. Like, they are much tougher to deal with compared to the first game, which is nice to see a real threat, but they're completely imbalanced. Like, I have never once, I don't believe, saw a fight where a human fleet has ever beat the zombies ever without my intervention. So they always just steamroll the other factions and what's worse is they infect the captains and the ships of the other crews, which will then join them, and then there's even more of them running around. So it really escalates quickly once they're on the map. There are people I've talked to about this game that have even mentioned that they like to prefer to just play the sandbox mode and even turn the zombies off. Personally, I like them because while they are much harder, it gives better endgame content in my opinion, because you can upgrade to the point where most other AI humans just don't really pose too much of a threat to you. You could start a faction and conquer the entire solar system if you so wished. It's really not that hard once you get used to it. But the zombies are, again, the only real threat there. When you're moving around the solar system, however, it is still very much like a top-down kind of like 2D perspective of it. But again, the combat is in 3D, which I think works out for the best for this game. For only $8, I would highly recommend it. And if you happen to have a VR headset, it does work with it. It doesn't require it, but you can play the game in VR, which is always an upside because it's a very great VR game on top of it. But even if you don't have a VR set, the game is still fantastic. Darkest Dungeon. So I'll give 2 prices for this as well, as there's 2 different ways to buy this game that's worth it. The first is just the vanilla game itself for 75% off at only $6.24. Then there's the Ancestral Edition, which is 70% off at $16.38. Now, I realize that price difference is actually, $10 and some change, but the DLC, in my opinion, is very much worth it. I would suggest getting the whole thing, but just the base game itself is an amazing game. Now, this is a Lovecraftian horror type game where it's very much inspired by, Lovecraft's works, and it's not just, you going around killing monsters, while there's, a lot of that. The ailments of how you're afflicted through such events actually matters. So your characters can actually develop psychological problems, even go into pure madness from the things that they're exposed to and the stresses they're under. Even the very sight of certain creatures can be, absolutely frightening to them and scar them emotionally. It's an RPG game where your characters can die, and once they're dead, but you can replace them by hiring new ones that come in the caravan. The problem is you don't actually control which characters are coming through the caravan. So sometimes if you have a bad early game, you might have to end up hiring someone you don't even want in your team just to fill the spot because it's better than leaving it empty. So the way this game works is kind of weird. So let's say you pick your team and you go into a dungeon. So there's a light aspect of it. If you don't have enough torches, it actually gets darker and darker until it's, you're literally walking pretty much blind kind of thing, which stresses out your characters even more. And the difficulty gets higher the less light you have around you, except for like boss fights, which are consistent in their difficulty. But the flip side to that is there's actually a good reason to let your light at least get lower than the highest levels, because yes, it's more dangerous, but the rewards tend to also be better. But even if you keep it at full light at all times, the game is pretty hard. It's unforgiving. There's a lot of RNG to it as well. So, like, one critical hit from an enemy could, like, devastate your entire team, even if it only hit one person, because it could freak them all out and cause, chaos between your team, especially if that character dies. You take some massive penalties if a character dies in front of your other characters generally. And you will lose people in this game. This is not a game that you want to really start getting, invested in caring about the characters that you're commanding, because there's a good chance they will die. Even your strongest guys are always at risk to some degree. It's got an awesome story that unravels as you play the campaign. You're not forced to rush yourself. You could keep grinding if you want, which I would highly recommend. Don't try to rush yourself through this because it becomes almost impossibly hard if you do that. Your characters gain levels, learn skills. You also manage a small town, which you could upgrade the buildings, you could upgrade your characters, weapons, armors, things like that. You manage their inventories. You even have to treat them. So, like, if they come back with a disease that they got because of an encounter that they had in a dungeon or other area, I won't spoil the game on where you go, but you have to get them treated if you could even afford it at at the hospital. And there's a lot of complexity to the game. It also has the best narrator to ever exist, ever. His name is Wayne June, and he has the most fantastic voice for this exact type of game. In fact, he also has done audiobooks on Lovecraftian works before this. And I have personally listened to them, every single one. And I would even recommend looking that up. Just search up Wayne June and Lovecraft, and I'm sure you'll find it. Like, trust me, if you haven't played this game yet, the moment you hear his voice, you're gonna fall in love with it because he has like the greatest voice for what this game is. Again, this game is like severely hard, um, and at times it's just outright unfair. I do understand if you're not into that kind of game to avoid it. That's fine. I respect that. But if you're up for a real challenge where your decisions in battle and really do matter, but chaotic things could still happen at any time, this is the game for you. It's one of the best indie games I've ever played personally. Oh, another thing that's worth mentioning is that it has workshop support, so there's also mods for it. So if the game does have things that you would like to change, there's chances are there's a mod that does it adequately already out there. That's always a fix if the game is you know, do, doing something that you think is a bit too much, like the difficulty and whatnot. It can be adjusted to some degree, but I would suggest just playing it vanilla through the first time. There's even mods where there's totally new classes and characters that you could get for on the workshop, which has really enhanced the game and its replayability as well. Just note that the DLCs actually make the game harder. So the first time you play it, you might not want to run through the DLC content right away because it's actually much harder with the DLC. Wasteland 2, Director's Cut, 75% off at only $7.49. So, Wasteland 2 takes place in a post-apocalyptic world near future, and it's actually the inspiration for what would later be the Fallout franchise. In fact, Brian Fargo would be one of the people to work on both. The franchise of Wasteland is actually from like '88, I think. It took like almost 30 years for this game to actually even come out, kind of thing. So it was really a surprise when it was even first announced. So this is a CRPG where you manage a squad of rangers, of desert rangers that basically work as sort of the only real law enforcement and righteous people that try to bring order in the chaos. It's another game where your decisions really matter. Even with the first main quest that'll become apparent, I won't spoil anything, but when you're hit by the first main quest, you have to make a choice of who to help, and you get to see right away that your choices really do impact what happens in the game. Now, the game doesn't go as deep as like Pathfinder Kingmaker. There's much less like management things. The most you really tend to manage in this mostly is the people within your squad, how much money you have, what they're wearing, what weapons they're using, the skills you invest in when they level up. So it's a good idea to have like diverse squad that's skilled in different things rather than just investing in the same skills. So that way you're better prepared for future scenarios that may pop up. A bit off topic, but recently the developer of this game actually was just bought out by Microsoft, which is kind of a bummer because I always hate it when one of the console manufacturers buys a developer, or even when a publisher does it, as they almost always tend to ruin them once that happens, and Microsoft is no exception to this. That when they bought Bungie out, it got so bad that Bungie split from them, which was a miracle, like the only time ever that's ever happened. But they've, run other companies to ground, like one of my favorite developers, Lionhead Studios, for example. So I do worry about the future of this developer, but that's totally off topic because this game is, the game is completed. There's nothing Microsoft could do to ruin what already exists. I do worry about the third game that's in development, but Wasteland 2 is a fantastic game. You don't have to play the original Wasteland to play this one at all. There are a few references to it, and it takes place a little after the first game, but it really doesn't matter. The story in this is very solid. The quests in it are fun. There's a lot of things to do in the game, but in terms of quests beyond just the main story, but the main story itself is excellent. Again, your choices do matter. What you say to people even matters. It's an excellent game, and fight everything from mutants to raiders to robots. It's a pretty wacky world. Again, it's what inspired Fallout to be a thing. I would highly recommend this game. For the price, I think it's fair because there's no DLC to buy. You get everything with the director's cut. It's a fully fledged game, and you'll be spending, hours upon hours of playing it if you like it. So I would highly recommend it. It really doesn't get enough praise and attention, I don't think. Dungeons and Dragons Chronicles of Mystara, 67% off for $4.94. So really this is two games, not just one. And they're old arcade beat 'em up games. And that may not sound so great at first until you realize they're two of the best beat 'em up games to ever exist, even to this day. That's how good they are. Obviously, from the name, you could quickly tell it takes place in the Dungeons and Dragons universe. And what makes this special, especially for the time, and keep in mind, this was in the arcades, is that you level up, you have different paths to choose that affect the story a bit, and what stages you play on. So there's actual choices with consequences to some degree, as minor as they may be in the whole grand scheme of things. There's different classes that you could pick from, and that each, some of them having different races, like the elf, for example, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. There's a human warrior, a cleric, dwarf, a mage, and the animations and the character models still look very good today, even because they were so well done from back then. It's really two amazing games. The second one is better, it looks better, it has more characters and more abilities and everything, but the first one is still a very solid game within itself. But the second one is probably the game you'll keep going back to over and over again. You could play this with your friends, for example, up to 4 players, which is great. It's really a blast when you play with other people. The game even has some, like humor to it. Like when you finish stages, sometimes you'll get a store where you could spend the collected gold that you collected in the levels previous to it, and you could like poke at the storekeeper and get yelled at and whatnot before you buy items and head out. It's quite amusing in that way, and to this day, again, it's two of the best beat 'em ups, especially the second game, to ever exist. For this price, there's no reason not to buy it. It's less than $5. Like if this was an arcade that was in front of you, you'd probably throw more than $5 in the arcade just to play it. So why not own it forever and keep it on Steam? The Forest, 50% off at $9.99. The Forest is a survival horror game that actually manages to be both very survival based and actually scary at the same time. You crash land in a island that's mysterious and full of cannibals, but there's much more than just that going on, but I won't spoil it. You get to craft, you get to hunt, you get to, kill the cannibals and other threats around you. It's actually very beautiful and very well done. You get to explore cave systems in realistic ways and everything. One of the things I encountered in this game that made me fall in love with it was I was climbing down into a cave system for the first time. And let's just say the thing that I saw made me nope right out of there and just climb right back up and just say screw that. And I didn't, go down there for quite some time to finally explore and deal with that. The bases that you could build in this game are actually quite nice compared to most survival games as well, and I really enjoy everything that this game really has to offer. Again, it's one of the better survival horror games out there that really put the emphasis on both. For $10, or rather $9.99, just a penny short, it's actually a really good deal and something that you could probably play for a very long time if you're into this type of game. It also has VR support. I personally have not tried that yet, despite me owning a Vive, because I don't know if I could handle playing this game in VR, to be honest. And I know that sounds silly, but oh my god, it freaked me out the first time I've actually played it in normally. So like, I can't imagine how frightening this game gets in VR. If you happen to have a VR set, though, it's just yet a bonus reason to get it. And like I said before, you can play with others. It has both online and LAN co-op play. This game is just a blast with friends, especially when you're building the bases together. I think that's the best time of it, and exploring like the spooky cave systems. Yeah, I can't say anything really bad about this game. There's really no downside to it. It's really one of the best crafted survival horror games currently out there, and what's amazing is it's a indie game on top of that. Road Redemption, 60% off at $7.99. This is a great price for a game that the developers clearly put a lot of love into, and it's very fun to play. It's obviously inspired by the Road Rash franchise, which has been in hiatus for, I believe, decades now. Unlike Road Rash, though, you don't get money after races and unlock new bikes and buy new bikes to get into faster races. There's none of that. Unfortunately, I wish the game actually did have that kind of mode. Instead, what you do is you get into normal races, but there's also variation into the levels. For example, there's boss fights, basically, where you have to take out a gang leader, and they tend to have, more health and everything compared to everyone else. And you have to get through the track, catch up to them, take them out before the track ends, kind of thing. I wouldn't mind that too much, but in my personal opinion, that gets old really quick, and with how overpowered like the guns typically are in this game, it was always pretty easy for me to just like shoot off the other bikers, even the bosses. When that's something that's strange that I don't believe the Road Rash games ever had, at least not the first three anyways, is actual guns. You could actually just shoot people. The way it also works is like you don't really change your bike until you change characters, which you have to unlock other characters and go on from there from your progress in game. I do kind of wish it was different than that, but it's still a very fun game. Throwing like C4 onto cop cars and blowing them up as they're chasing you is always quite entertaining. It's very action packed. There's very few moments where you're not really engaged in some way of, some conflict in action. There's an actual story campaign behind it, and it's not obviously it's not the richest story ever, but it works for what the game is. It's very fun. It's very fun to play with other people as well. The rooftop stages where you are literally jumping from rooftop to rooftop in the races and whatnot. So that's always chaotic, and at first it had me like puzzled, like I was terrible at it, but once I got better at those stages, I really appreciated how intense those stages can be. It's actually better than the actual racing on the roads. Also, if you beat the game, there's a very hilarious like bonus race at the end, and that I really appreciated the humor behind it. I won't spoil it for you, but if you're gonna play the game, make sure you play it all the way through for that, because you'll get a kick out of it. The 2016 version of Doom. Oh boy. 70% off at only $5.99. What a great price for one of the best modern first-person shooters to exist today. I can't get over how smooth and fluid the controls and movement were when I first played this game. By far was the best feeling to move around in any modern first-person shooter game, and I think that still holds true to this day, in fact. It still looks beautiful, plays beautiful, and, you know, it's Doom. It's almost non-stop action of, you know, punching demons in the face and blowing them apart to bits with overpowered weaponry, and yeah, it's just a fantastic game. The campaign is really fun. It's not too long, it's not too short, it's just that right size. And there's even replayability because there's plenty of specials that in hidden areas that you may not find the first time, that you will probably have to play more than once through to find it all, which is a nice touch to it. It does have multiplayer, but let's be real, no one buys it for the multiplayer. Everyone buys Doom for the single player campaign. Multiplayer is forgettable. I don't even know why they even bothered to put it in, to be honest, but it's there if you want to try it. And try it you should if you don't own it already, because paying like $6 for this game is one of the best games on sale on this entire Steam sale for this summer, for sure. It's always a blast because, you know, playing as like the Doom guy, you're not some just helpless guy or average guy. You're slaughtering the demons, and it's a weird situation where they probably should be more afraid of you than you of them, kind of thing. It's almost like a strange role reversal in a way, but the game doesn't really put much attention to that. You know, it doesn't overtly just say it. I have to admit, when I first heard about this game before it was released, when it was just announced, I was weary that they would really do it injustice to the Doom franchise, for, you know, because reboots of franchises in video games, most of the time they don't go well, kind of like with films. But this is an example where they took an iconic franchise and turned it into something very special for the modern era. I would recommend this game to anyone who likes first-person shooters, especially single-player ones. Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, 40% off, $23.99. Now I realize this is the most expensive game I think that I've recommended here in this video, and it will be the last game I'm recommending right now, though I may make future videos because I have other recommendations, but these are the ones I just decided to put in the first one. Anyways, before I digress too much, despite the price, this is a near perfect game. The characters are great. The story for the type of game is very suitable. The animations are great. The graphics are great. Everything is just fantastic. The soundtrack is wonderful. I love listening to the music in this, and I'm the type of person who will often turn down the sound on a lot of games if they don't really, really stand out. And yet this is one that I've always kept it on. It really goes to show just how badly Konami has messed up in recent times, because people have been dying for a proper Castlevania game for some time now, and we haven't gotten one for what feels like ever. And here's Bloodstained coming in, who is also, you know, made by one of the creators of Castlevania, to fill in that spot. So it just shows how dumb Konami is for not doing the obvious things that they should be doing. But enough about them. Let's talk about the game. The bosses battles in this game are by far the best thing about it, in my opinion. The memorable boss battles and how unique they all are and look. What's crazy is there's a lot to do in this game despite it being Castlevania-like. For example, there's quests that you could pick up to do. You could even pick up ingredients and cook. You could craft new things. There's actually a lot to do as well as find all the secrets. I would really recommend this game for this price. Of course, as always, check if it's cheaper anywhere else. But this is one of the best Castlevania or Metrovania type games to come out in years. Felseal, Arbiter's Mark, 66% off at $10.19. It's also worth noting that the game has brand new DLC that just released. That's 15% off at $11.04, but I can't comment on the quality of the DLC yet. I have yet to play it. I just kind of find it funny that the brand new DLC, which is also on sale, is still somehow more expensive than the base game. So this game is kind of funny in the way it sets itself up. It makes you sound like a Judge Dredd kind of like group of people, judge, jury, and executioner. And you kind of are, but it's really not up to you. The story is beyond really what you want. It's just going to progress, which is fine. Not every game has to be one where you have like direct control over what's going to happen in some way. The graphics in this are very nice. I like the looks of the characters and the portraits in it. It's all very well done. Animations are lacking, but honestly, that's typical in these types of games. Gameplay wise, if you ever played a game like Final Fantasy Tactics or anything similar, you know exactly what to expect here. It's not too dramatically different, but that's a case of don't fix what isn't broken, really. These games have always played quite well. There's a reason why they haven't really changed too much in time. One thing I do love about it is how much customization there is in the game, both in cosmetic and class. I'll start with the cosmetic. So, unfortunately, you can't change the name or looks of any main character in the game, any character that actually, gets lines to talk and actually has a reason to be there story-wise. But for everyone else that you hire and put into your team, you can customize them to a very large degree. There is so many combinations and that you could do to change their looks from gender to hair color to what they're wearing. Like, I think there's might be like 50 different variations or 40, something like that, hats or something like that. I, it's crazy. You could even change the characters' portraits, and there's plenty of those to choose from that are pre-made, and I believe you could even insert any portrait that you want in there as well. I haven't used that feature yet though. I know this isn't the first game to do it, but this game also has the ability to customize classes. You could change class at any time. So, for example, if you don't want your wizard to be a wizard anymore and you want them to be a cleric to heal people, you could do that, which is a nice touch because sometimes you need one class over another at a time. And it's nice to be able to just convert them over. And on top of it, there's actual reason to do this even if you don't need them at this exact moment to be that. And that's because as you gain more levels in more than one class, you'll actually unlock totally new classes that are typically stronger in some ways or have new abilities that you might want. On top of it, you could even dual class. So for example, you could set it up for a knight to be able to cast elemental magic, and any skills that they've previously learned, they still carry over. So like if you have high level spells, they could cast those high level spells. It won't be as effective as when they were, normally a wizard beforehand, but it's still very useful in many cases. For a game that came out in just April 30th of 2019, it's really not that old of a game yet either. So it's actually quite nice to see it go this cheap on sale. I certainly would recommend it for anyone who likes these types of games for sure. I really adored it. And there's also a new game plus option, so if if you're the type of person, and I certainly am, that enjoys the option of at least, the new game plus and things for these types of games, it's there. So you will get more out of it than just one playthrough. Well, that's all for now. I think I listed like 15 games, and I just don't want to make this video unbearably long. Maybe I'll make another. Also, if you feel I missed anything that's worth of note, or even if it's not on sale on Steam itself, but somewhere else, feel free to leave a comment and give your own recommendations. Thank you for making it this long. And if you like this video, please consider liking, and if you really like what you have seen today, please consider subscribing too. Thank you.